This is the Local Real Estate Developer Podcast, where we share the stories of locals across the country who took that empty lot or that old building and turned it into something awesome that their community needs. I'm Kristi Kandel, and I've been a real estate developer my entire career. My co-host Raphael is a commercial broker, and together we're sharing the stories of locals making a huge impact on their communities. And what we've learned is you don't need millions in the bank or decades of experience to get started. You just need the confidence, tools, and the right people around you. This podcast is your chance to gain the confidence to get in the game, because real estate development isn't just for the insiders anymore. It's for people like you too.
Welcome, everyone, to the Local Real Estate Developer Podcast. I'm your co-host, Raphael, located here in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm a commercial broker, investor, and developer, and I'm really excited to be here again with my co-host, Kristi Kandel, developer extraordinaire. Always great to see you, Kristi.
Yeah, great to see you. And like you said, yep, I'm a real estate developer, investor. I teach locals how to become developers in their community. I was, the other day I was going through LinkedIn and I was seeing what people were posting, and I came across our guest today, and I just really enjoyed how the stories were being told, the information he was sharing, and we reached out. And today I want to welcome Jon Jon Wasolowski to the show. Hey, welcome.
Hey, I'm excited to be here.
And what part of the world are you coming from?
So I'm from Chattanooga, Tennessee, and it's a great market. There is a lot of energy and momentum here, but there's also that inertia that comes with change. And so it's sort of a microcosm of what's happening at scale across the country. And so I think part of what's helped tend to my success over the last 5 years is by being able to tell the story of Chattanooga. I've been able to sort of touch on the story of the rest of America as well.
I love that. And we were talking earlier how, just from the outside of seeing what Chattanooga is doing and where it's going, I think it's an excellent example that we can share with our audience to help them understand, here's how it could apply to my community. So why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of background on who you are and how you got to the spot?
Yeah. So, a lot of times I like to start with this concept that I am an armchair urbanist. I am not a developer. I am not a city planner, but I work with both of those types of people. It all started with this sort of naming what I'm seeing in the built environment, and someone who's always been obsessed with city planning and urbanism. I talked about it, but because it wasn't my career at that point, I could talk about it more freely. And I also fought to use words that were less esoteric to bring more people into the fold. And so it all started really with a TikTok account that sort of blew up as people started to realize, I actually care a lot about how my city is developing. And one of my missions is to bring people into the conversation before it's totally reactionary. So instead of just hey, something's changing on my block, I don't like it, let me stop it, people to go out and advocate for the types of changes they want to see proactively. And it was from here I was sort of introduced to this incremental development movement of small scale developers who are building out communities, before the zoning lends to it, before the building permits become more permissive and thoughtful. And so I think my background is that by not having all these, professional statuses I have to uphold, I've been able to sort of create a message that reaches everybody. And I've also been able to speak into systems that otherwise would be threatening if my livelihood fully depended on it.
No, that makes perfect sense, because you're not the big bad developer to the community who you're trying to share and educate, and to the city, it's not like you're coming in with an agenda of, I want my project to go because I need to make money. So I love that. Sort
of started with, seeing what I see and talking about it, and also being so frustrated with some of the goings on in Chattanooga, where I feel like people were opposing things that was no, this is to your benefit. If you want better schools, we need a better tax base. If you want less sewer runoff and water runoff issues, we need to build where there's already infrastructure. So it was being really frustrated with individuals and being okay, how can I speak to them in a way that isn't patronizing, but also helps them recognize what's happening? But then at the same time, realizing the only developers that were gaining ground were people with power to strong arm the system, and coming in and finding the people who were doing interesting projects, who were advocating for change at a different level so that there wouldn't be as much, favoritism towards this sort of jam development down your throat, regardless of the outcome or how it affects the community. And so it was in balancing these two perspectives that I found myself like showing up to city council, speaking during public comment. It was from that perspective that my content, I felt like, started to resonate with people. And that started introducing me to developers who were like, hey, I'm doing something different, but no one seems to get it. So actually, a portion of my revenue, of my livelihood, is actually working with architects, developers, showcasing their work and helping the broader community understand its positive impact in these situations. Or if it's a less than ideal development, why? And this isn't necessarily what a developer would hire me for, but one story I like to tell is like, hey, if this is a less than ideal development, what were the ideal developments that could never come to fruition in part because of the code? There's a community that is striking down condos being built in their community, and they want something else, but duplexes were outlawed. You know, missing middle housing was outlawed, and it's like you could only build single family homes, or in this case, they were seeking a zoning change to build condos, and it's like, well, condos are the most affordable option right here. Like, we hear that word, we think luxury, but it's like, yes, you know, these aren't cheap compared to what this community has been in the past, but really the option was $500,000 houses, $250,000 condos, or nothing, because we've outlawed anything in between.
Yeah. Yeah, you nailed it. I literally got a text from my brother the other day who just moved to Phoenix, and he's like, yeah, I think pricing for housing is cheaper than I thought. I'll go ahead and buy. And then he says, I'll buy a condo. And I'm like, ooh, for so many reasons, but it's because the condos were $200 to $250, and whereas housing was the other. So yeah, that's a good point.
Absolutely. So curious about your background and what got you into this vertical to begin with. Did you have a city planning background, and that's kind of what got you into this role of kind of advising cities and other professionals?
Yeah, and I would say when you use the word advising, I've come and spoke on behalf of cities or what have you. I never have my hands in the weeds or the plans because I don't have any of that professional designation. For me, it actually started quite young with an obsession with architecture. And I can sort of pinpoint this moment right as I was about to go off to college, where a Georgia Tech student started talking to me about this concept of new urbanism. This wild idea that the outside of buildings influence humans as much, maybe even more than the insides, because more people are interacting with that outside built environment. And at that point, I thought, I'm going to school for this and I want to do this. Well, fast forward 10 years, and I didn't graduate college until I was 29. I got married pretty young, and I was still obsessed with this topic, but I really didn't see it as a career path. So I found myself in more niche corners of the internet in order to talk to people. So I realized, like, I'm the only one here not getting paid for this. I'm talking to architects about fenestration and things like that. It was like, so really when I started making content online, it was because I was like, I really just want to talk about these ideas, and there's no places where I could sort of do that with a regular person. Well, fast forward 3 years, and in that meantime, I have traveled to different cities with organizations who are trying to tell the story of what they're trying to accomplish. And so in that way, I've worked with cities through these organizations like Neighborhood Evolution and Incremental Development Alliance. I've advocated for actual streetscape projects and legislation within my city and tried to mirror that to other cities. But at the end of the day, more than anything, I'm here as a storyteller trying to get developers to tell their story in a relatable, actionable way, and then also to help cities see the narratives that are arising within that, you know, this isn't them versus our city. A city is never a static thing. And so how I got here really feels like I sort of like snuck in behind someone who had a key card, and then I was here and people were like, all right, might as well join us. And that's kind of what I'm doing right now.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, it's always interesting to hear people's perspective about how they get into what we will describe as the development space, just because it is kind of a gate-kept industry, and a lot of times you just don't even know of it being an option. So I appreciate the context there. One thing I'm curious about is maybe describe some of the more recent projects you've been involved in with the city or other people that you've been working with.
Yeah, so I really have two areas of focus. One is like street and transit, and the other one is like, you know, city development, things like that. Right now, within my city, we're working on different things. Like we just helped pass single stair reform. And actually, I'm not sure on this podcast, how much should I go into explaining terms like that?
Are you talking like multifamily where we have to have 2 sets of stairs and now you go to one and then...
Exactly.
Yeah. Maybe super high level on that and the importance of that, because that, yes.
Yeah. So what a lot of people don't know, and actually there's this document from like the New York City like building code from a public meeting in 1911, in which they're talking very openly about the types of people they don't want in their neighborhoods, like immigrants, people of color, and Irish immigrants, people of color, Jews, and they state that pretty clearly. And then they also state one way we can get this done is we can look at the types of housing that they're in and create a building burden so high on that type of housing that it becomes unfeasible to build that in the community. And then they start naming things like anything bigger than a triplex. Let's make it have the same sort of security standard as a high-rise building. And from that legacy, we've inherited sort of this idea that every safety standard that's in place was put there with great intention and great outcome. But we start to realize, like, wait a second, some of the buildings that we've inherited that can't be built today have remained safe in part because of technology that has to do with HVAC system and firewalls and fire response times. And that places in Europe that don't have a lot of these standards that we have are doing just fine and have a better fire safety record than we do. So we can start to question things that have always been put up in the name of safety. And one of those is stairways or points of egress. So the idea is any building 4 stories or higher, I think that's what it is in the state of Tennessee, has 2 stairwells, fire protected, and they have to be connected. So every floor. So what that does is it basically turns 20% of a building in some cases into liminal transitory space. It also affects the quality of life of the build. So instead of having a skinny building in which there's light coming in from both ends, you end up building a wider building to double the units, and people only have a source of light from one side. So single stair reform is saying, hey, we can take fire code seriously, and we can create a point of egress that makes sense, but we could also lessen the financial burden of developing these, which then can be passed on to the person buying the house. And so single stair reform recently passed in Chattanooga. I think it's anywhere like 5 to 7 stories. You can build a building with 1 set of stairway, provided it meets certain safety codes and standards. This was something we did quietly. And I say we, the AIA and different architects were leading this charge. And at one point, I was sort of being tapped in to do some public advocacy. And I was like, wait a second, a lot of people don't know about this, / they aren't resisting it. What if we just let you do what you're doing and not make it a public issue? But then there's other aspects like accessory dwelling units or ADUs, which are being highly resisted. They were legalized in our city, but some of the permitting or the financials for getting a bank to loan towards it are so hard that we're needing to come up with like, hey, look, a bank is not going to loan for a $200,000 structure to be built in my backyard because they don't own the property underneath it. What if we could subdivide this lot? I would still own both of my lots, but now a bank could buy my lot and give me a loan to build on it. And then now what we've just unlocked is a regular homeowner, instead of having to have a huge equity line of credit in order to afford a building, can now double the efficiency of their lot with an ADU back there. Those are the types of things I'm working on now. As far as projects that have gone through recently, a lot of that has had more to do with the transit and the streetscape space. And there was a Fraser Avenue in Chattanooga, Tennessee. It was a 5-lane sort of thoroughfare type of road, but it also was lined with a lot of small businesses. One side of it was really well developed because it had a pedestrian bridge that brought people from downtown across the river. And the other side had a high vacancy rate. The dwell time was different, just on the different sides of the street if you're measuring it for commercial real estate. Unfortunately, there was a tragedy there that brought about a need for change, and developers, business owners, concerned citizens came together to right-size that road, to build in additional facilities. And what has happened over the last few years has shown the direct connection between streetscapes and the businesses and the real estate around them. Businesses on the other side of the street have started popping up now that people feel safe to cross the street, now that it's knocked down to 2 lanes. Businesses on both sides celebrate what is sometimes called a night market, where the businesses bring out tents on the sidewalk, almost like a festival, and they and they hold their they sell their wares on the side of the road. And they can only do that in part because they now back up to a bike lane and parking rather than a speeding, rushing traffic. So projects like that, I've helped spearhead change within the community that directly affect the business and the real estate nearby. And then the other things
and
are
is that
more
for the transit projects like that, are you working directly? Who's the catalyst for that? Is that the city going, why is this not working? Is it the public side saying, hey, we need this help, like our businesses are suffering because of this? Because is that more of a public works engineering standpoint of, hey, all of our roads need to be this wide and have this and this, you need X wide sidewalks, and yet you guys are coming in with the human perspective going, hey, here's how a human is actually going to see and feel and walk this, what can make this work?
In this specific case with this road, it was very much a public movement that was happening. So backstory, this road had federal funding to right size 8 years ago, or 8 years before this crash happened. But the businesses were nervous about it, right? Like change, like they're surviving now. There's big change. Will they survive after the change? And what's hard to convince people is like, hey, you don't get paid by wallets that drive by. You get paid by wallets that pass through the door. And what we want to do is help wallets pass through the door. Now, when this crash happened, the momentum that was seized by the public, which was just like, no one is going to oppose this in light of this tragedy, which took the lives of multiple family members on Small Business Saturday, for people who were out of town. So it was like the hospitality industry, all of this. And so we were able to get that change, although towards the end, some businesses resisted. And then now that they've seen that it's beneficial, there's sort of this aspect of other businesses wanting like, hey, I want what they have. And so with me, I work where the energy is. If there are public officials who are looking to get a win and I can represent them, I will do it. If there's a business that's looking to come into a community and help change that, I want to help them do it. There's a neighborhood in Chattanooga, East Chattanooga, that has suffered for the last 4 decades, but they have this street called Glass Street that has great urban form and great potential. The challenge is they feel the threat of outside developers. So they're going to host a block party. What I want to do during that block party is create an informal charrette where I print off pictures of the empty buildings and vacant lots and put renderings on them and give people stickers to vote on the types of things they want there. And then we can start telling a story of, okay, instead of we don't want developers, that's a threat to us. It's like, okay, now you know what you want. What kind of developer can help bring that about?
Right.
So
you can bring that vision to life. That's exactly what we need. When you come in as a developer, sometimes there's a checkbox depending on the type of project where they say you need to have a neighborhood meeting. And most times developers will look at that and they'll groan and they'll go, it's more work. But it's actually exactly what our communities need, because too many times the reason we're the big bad developer is because development is happening to our communities, not with and for our communities. So having these types of meetings, having the storytelling, helping people picture and understand. And this, to me, this is where AI and technology are going to be great, because the 3D modeling we can bring in, and there's so many different functions where if you can see and touch and feel and go, so not even just a picture, but and you can get into that immersive storytelling, I think we can help change, like you said, a lot of perspectives and lives and communities.
And I think it's also worth noting, like, not sugarcoating it, right? Like there's this apocryphal quote that I don't think is actually true, where Henry Ford says something like, if I asked the people what they wanted, they would have asked for a faster horse, right? And I think there's a note to truth to that. If you come to a community and you say, what do you want? And they say a grocery store. There's some backpedaling and education you have to do, which it says like, hey, Aldi is a somewhat discount small grocery store, and they will not look at coming to your street unless 25,000 cars drive by a day. It was like, so if Aldi won't do it, Publix isn't going to do it. Kroger's not going to do it. You're not going to get a grocery store here. But then, so you could have that sort of like talk down, like, I know you want a grocery store, but you aren't going to do it. But you can also ask thoughtful questions of the community. What happened to the last grocery store? Why did they leave? What type of grocery store do you want? And then you start realizing, actually, you have grocery stores. You have tiendas nearby. Why aren't they serving your needs? Oh, you didn't know about them? Or like you have to get everything in one spot, so you end up driving extra few miles. Those sort of conversations are hard to have, because when you show up to those community meetings, you're going to have people that want something to work like magic. And that's a moment where I think developers can come in and say like, hey, I'm not a magician. Here's how I can get you one step closer towards that goal. Or here's how we're going to do this here in the community. And I think that's honestly, Raphael, what you're saying, honestly, that is where most people end up hiring me, whether I am working for, an architect that works for developers and also does their own development. It's to come help explain to people like, hey, I'm not a silver bullet for all of your community's problems, but I am a rung on the ladder that has been missing for a really long time. And I want to help you move up that ladder.
Hey, can we chat for a second? Since you're listening to this podcast, you're already thinking like a developer. You see the potential in your community, and you're ready to do more than just watch from the sidelines. That's exactly why we created the Local Developer Vault. It's a free resource full of tools, templates, and trainings to help you take action. And here's the best part. When you sign up, you'll also get access to our local real estate developer community. It's full of people just like you who are making real things happen in their neighborhoods. So don't just listen to the stories. Become the next one that we spotlight on our show. The link in the show notes to unlock the vault and join our movement.
Yeah. No, and it requires someone who has different outside perspective. And I think also, too, having someone who can explain what you're describing that isn't a stakeholder obviously you're a stakeholder because you're a community member, but you're not directly tied to what the developer is trying to do. Because I think one of the challenges oftentimes with development is that developers may or may not live in the community that they're trying to bring something to, whether that's retail development, office development, multifamily, whatever that is. And so community members oftentimes feel like there's an outsider coming in that doesn't really understand our community. And not all developers are the greatest. We don't have the greatest reputation when it comes to really getting in to the community, having conversations with them and seeing if there's ways to be able to create a thoughtful development on site. And so being able to have someone like yourself who has perspective on different projects around town, you've had success in various different avenues, it helps to somewhat bridge the gap. And doesn't mean that chasm is always going to be bridged, because there's some times where a development is just not going to make sense and there's going to be enough opposition to where it just can't move forward. If you can be thoughtful about the way that you approach that process, obviously that could help on the private side. And then on the city side, to your point, I mean, you refer to other projects or other areas of town where things have worked and try to get buy-in that way.
Yeah. And let me give you a perfect example of this.
Mm-hmm.
Last city council I went to a week ago, there was a developer who bought this building, Kandel Baptist Church, 10 years ago, and has sat on it and done nothing. And now they want to develop it because the real estate around it has become valuable enough that it's worth developing. What they can build by right, like R1 through 3, is like single family homes, right? Now, what they want to build is some condos, and they're willing to work with the existing structure that's there to preserve the structure itself. Now, okay, let's talk about how this played out. The particular city councilor whose district this was in is a huge NIMBY. They represent a voter bloc that doesn't want new housing, in part because they feel threatened about getting displaced by it.
Can you explain NIMBY real quick?
Yeah. So NIMBY stands for Not in My Backyard, and it's sort of like used to describe people who, on different levels of the spectrum, are resisting new development, specifically housing. And the Not in My Backyard, I think a lot of people realize, isn't always obstinate, evil-sounding people. A lot of times it's like, oh, I love the idea of a homeless shelter. We need affordable housing, but it doesn't make sense in our community, And so it's this idea of like, you can do this, but not in my backyard. But then there's a more hostile form that's just like, not in my backyard. You're not building this here. And that's kind of the community that this developer wanted to build into. So the legitimate fears of the community are there. The city councilor says, hey, you bought this 10 years ago. Why are you just doing it now? It's been a blight in our community for 10 years. I would rather that historical structure be torn down than see luxury condos built in my community. Now, this is where the developer had a chance to come in and say, look, when I bought this community, or when I bought this building, there was nothing that I could build that penciled. There's nothing that I could build that would serve the community that I could afford to do. Now, there are laws that could change where I could have done something. I could have built duplexes. I could have built this up, but there's nothing I could do. Now, for the last 10 years, I've mowed the lawn. I've boarded up the windows, which he did. Like, it wasn't the biggest blight you've ever seen. And we're at a point where I can build something and save the structure. And what I've decided on is called a horizontal property regime. If I destroyed this building and built homes, I could build 5 homes that would cost $500,000 each. But if I do a horizontal property regime, it's going to be opportunities to split this up into smaller units that can be owned, not just rented. And another way, and these units can have their own walls, they can be attached, it can be a mixture of them. But if I do this, this is the cheapest possible housing that can be sold rather than rented on this property. That is a very different sort of approach than coming in and saying, can I please build 35 condos here? And in this case, I know I said earlier, I like to be less esoteric, but I talk about a horizontal property regime, which is the mechanism for condoing a building. I use that in part to get away from some of the stigma that comes with the term condo. And it is true. There are places in town where you can't legally split up a lot. And so an architect is using condoization to create smaller units, but some of these are completely freestanding. They're small homes, but couldn't do it otherwise unless he did a horizontal property regime in that case. Yeah. So that to me is like the opportunity of a developer to come in and say, let me tell you why I've sat on this for 10 years. And if I had done something back then, how that wouldn't have served the community. Or honestly, the developer could have come in with an apology first that said like, yeah, when I bought this, I didn't know what I was going to do with it. And I've been so focused on other projects, but I want to make it right. And I want to do the best thing now. Here's why I think this is the best thing now. But they didn't do that. An attorney represented them at city council. The attorney said some pretty, I think, ignorant things that really didn't grate on the city councilor. And they had a moment to back off. If the developer had said, I can tell they're not going to vote my way, I want to withdraw. When you withdraw in Chattanooga, you can resubmit at any time. But if you get denied, you have to wait a year before you resubmit anything there. And they didn't. They went straight to the vote, and it was 9-0. They did not get what they wanted there. And what's sad is the community's going to lose. That building's probably going to get bulldozed. The property's probably going to get resold. Who knows? And it might be another 5-10 years before anything gets built there.
I see that happen so often. It's just, it's sad because it could be more. And you nailed it at the beginning. If they had just said, I bought it thinking I could do something, it didn't happen, because so many times I'll be talking to locals and be like, yeah, so-and-so's owned that lot for so long, but they'd never done anything. So what happens during that time is you start creating a story about that property owner in your mind and about all of that. Whereas if you just said, hey, let's figure this out together, and you just came forward and were authentic and we're like, let's find a path forward.
Yeah. No, it goes to show the nuance of development too, because I think there's a lot of people out there that just think that these public meetings or these metro council meetings are just boxes to be checked, and they don't really consider that this is also a political way. You have to approach it from a political standpoint too. You have to understand the needs of your community members, and then have to understand what stakeholders are involved in the approval process, and then try to find ways to be able to convey a message that allows them to, get on your side, and also conform to what you could potentially work as far as the development's concerned. You kind of threw out a term earlier that described the process of condozation that it seems like allowed you to alleviate some of the stigma associated with condos, but that's just a change of verbiage. But it still kind of accomplishes the same goal, but that's you being strategic about the way that you approach that process.
Yeah. And that happened, like another negative example was there's a street in Chattanooga called Northmore Road. Completely unsafe. If you Google Northmore Road, the top hits are going to be pictures of cars in people's yard. And think of like a 5-lane thoroughfare lined with houses, not commercial projects. And it kept widening to allow commuters to essentially cut through a neighborhood. So it's not the community that needs a wider road, it's other communities that want easy access to downtown. So if you look at it, for years, the community said, do something about it to the city, do something. So the city goes and does a traffic study and realizes Northmore Road doesn't need to be 5 lanes. We can make it 3 lanes. And if we made it 3 lanes, we could use that middle lane as a dedicated turn lane. And that dedicated turn lane alleviates a lot of the dangers. And the narrowing of the lanes makes it safer. All these positive benefits. And as a city, we don't need to maintain 5 lanes of asphalt. So there's all these benefits that could come. But now it also creates this extra space to create bike lanes or additional parking, just a lot of extra useful space. Well, when the city came to the meeting to show it to the public, they didn't start with, you asked for safety, we looked into it, here's the safest possible road that serves the needs of this community. By the way, we have all this additional space. We're thinking maybe putting bike lanes here, but what do you want? They instead came and said, hey, we have bike lanes for you. And the neighborhood said, we didn't ask for bike lanes. Get this out of here. And it got repaved as a 4 to 5 lane road. It's going to be unsafe for the next next 25 years. And it's all because of that approach of like, don't come in and say, here's bike lanes. Come in and say, here's some additional space after we made the road safe. What do you want to do with it? What do you want to call it? And in fact, I've started campaigns locally where I say, like, call it anything but a bike lane. At the end of the day, a safer road is the priority. And a lot of times you end up with extra space that you could put a bike lane there, but that's not the main reason. And to give a good example of this, let's go on the flip side. A city councilor who's no longer representing my district now was facing a situation where a neighborhood association was saying, someone wants to rezone this to build 6 townhomes. The neighborhood rejects it. We don't want this. And the city councilor said, who's rejecting this? Because I held a community meeting and there's a few people that showed up, but who's rejecting this? And the neighborhood association couldn't really say. So she said, I want to delay this 1 week. Let's talk about this next week. She then went out as a city councilor, knocked on every door for a 3-block radius, talking to those people, and found the one person who opposed it, who was a doctor, who had some influence with the neighborhood association. Everyone else either said, I don't care, or yes, I would like to see more housing here. And so when she came back the next week, the developer basically said, look, I'm going to build 4 homes that are 4 rooms each. And the only way to make the pencil is to find college students to rent it. So you're going to have 12 college students. You're going to have 12 cars parked on the side of the road. Or I could do 6 townhomes that help 6 couples or 6 single individuals. And there will probably be less cars parked on the street. Which do you want? And after the city councilor had knocked on those doors, the community was like, we don't care. Or they were like, yeah, townhomes sound great. And the townhomes got built. Unfortunately, you don't have a lot of city councilors who are willing to first recognize this might not be the whole story and go get that story for you.
That's commitment right there. But that obviously has led to a positive development that's only going to benefit that community for quite some time, because the benefits of an increased tax base. Now you have new residents in the community that are engaging with local businesses in that community, and you have this ripple effect that occurs just by putting in a little bit of extra effort as opposed to and getting some information, because you're right that I'm sure the neighborhood association was keeping that somewhat close to the vest because they didn't want to divulge that information. But again, just having conversations with people and getting people on board is the way to do it.
And to give them the benefit of the doubt, a lot of times, whoever's representing that neighborhood association did show up to meetings where a lot of people opposed it, but people who either don't care or are for something probably aren't going to find childcare to show up to a middle of the day meeting at city hall. It's the people who are really angry and livid about it. The next door neighbor who doesn't want to hear, the sounds of demolition or building for the next 6 months. And the other thing is to really drive in to what people are concerned about. So for example, there's a parking lot across from my house and the developer wanted to turn it into apartments. I was the only neighbor that showed up that was for those apartments being built. And one of the things they said is increased traffic. Our neighborhood is already unsafe. Our kids can't play outside. This is going to increase traffic. And I was like, wait a second. It's unsafe because of fast moving cars. If there's a new preschool going in with a kid's drop-off line, that actually kind of increases safety for an hour because no one's cutting through here. There's congestion. So asking those questions of like, okay, when you say increased traffic, are you worried about congestion and inconvenience? Or are you worried about safety and cut through? Because right now our neighborhood is perfect to cut through, and that's why cars are driving quick. If the neighborhood becomes something else where each side is lined with parked cars, that visual narrowing slows people down. I was like, there actually are traffic calming benefits to density here. And in the case of my neighborhood, we're a really old first ring suburb that has alleyways cut between each block. I was like, we never have to worry about parking. We all can park behind our house if we wanted to. Most people don't want to. I was like, but we always have that option. So there also is just this opportunity to dig one step deeper. Hey, when you said you're afraid of traffic, are you talking about safety? Because like this is probably going to slow people down or keep people from cutting through our neighborhood.
Traffic and noise are the two things. And when you start getting into life safety, that's when, yes, you have to dig deeper and go, what is the real concern? Okay, can we find a true legitimate reason to work around it? And like you said earlier, with the people who come to the hearings, I was a planning commissioner for a couple of years, and I actually made it to where we had to have the meetings virtually to where people could also call in and attend and do public comment from that, because we were at 1 p.m. We're in the middle of a day. So who's showing up to that 1 p.m. meeting? People who are retired, people who don't have a job. Okay. We were a older community, but I was like, this is BS. We need to have this. And so I actually, while I could have driven down and attended in person, I attended remotely because I wanted to make sure that they kept it remote. So that way people who are working could actually come, could have public comment, because we were in the middle of a 30-year master plan update. I'm like, hell no, we are not excluding a big chunk of our community because they have a job and they're working.
And they're going to be the members. They're going to be the members in the community for the next 30 years.
Right. Right. And the people showing up aren't going to be there, but they're going to talk about the same things. And then I did find myself being a translator a lot because it was like, look, guys, I live here. I care about how our community grows too. And yes, I'm the big bad developer, but at the same time, I can be that translator to help everyone understand. And you're never going to win everyone over. But I think the more like storytelling that you're doing, that's why I resonated with what you post and what you do, because we can see that and what's happening in Chattanooga. We can take some of those same core frameworks of arguments and use them for discussion in other communities to try and make this positive change to go, hey, just because something's always been this way, like the freaking 2 sets of stairs, I guarantee you're going to blow so many people's minds when they go, wait, are you serious? And then they might start digging more into the code. I'm a huge fan of, why does the code say that? What's the reason for that? And what's funny is, not funny, but the person on the other end is like, what do you mean why? It's here. I'm like, no, dig deeper. And if you need to go talk to people who are in the background and senior engineers or plan checkers, go talk to them, because I want to know why this is here. What happened to make this be put in? And let's see if there's another way around. Maybe there's not, but let's at least see why.
And for me, the thing I'm most passionate about getting started here in Chattanooga is what is sometimes referred to as like an incremental development alliance. Who are the small to medium-sized developers who are solving real problems, but in a silo, disconnected from other people? And how can we bring them together both to advocate for each other and to just learn from each other? And I want to give you an example of this. There is an old mill in a neighborhood just north of mine that's been closed. It was built in the 90s. I think it's over 200,000 square feet of building and then other buildings on the property. It's 2 city blocks wide. And this small scale developer, someone who bought and developed like duplexes and pre-built things, bought that property for a song. Huge environmental liabilities, brownfield development for sure, all sorts of other things. But what she did is, first, she balanced the books by it being owner occupied. Her and her husband had a business. They put their business there. So instead of paying rent, they're paying rent to themselves. That's helping a pencil. They had a big empty warehouse that was built out and ready to go. They rented it out to a indoor soccer school. And again, these weren't big rents. Like, you're not looking at, industrial malls where you're pulling in $400 a square foot. It was like, we are literally just going to pay the mortgage on 2 city blocks by renting it ourselves, renting out to an indoor soccer company, and a glass recycler. Those were like the 3 main tenants. Oh, and a small grocery store, tienda. So those 4 tenants anchored one small warehouse on the property. And then they started closing in one at a time housing units. And I think they have now like 4 or 5 housing units. And the rental prices for that are close to rental prices for government subsidized build outs from a nonprofit developer. So they're like crushing it, right? Like, they're bringing life back to the neighborhood. Instead of displacing, they're empowering local businesses. And you would think that the city would see this and be like, okay, brownfield remediation dollars, we're prioritizing you. Well, instead, the next phase of development, she's a friend of mine now, Anka, was like, we got to tie in the sewer. And there is no tie-in on this side of the block. The city is going to have to bring in sewer all the way up the street, totally repave the street. It's going to cost $100,000 for us to tie into the sewer. The plumber she was working with was like, hey, you have it on the other side of this property. Give yourself an easement, tie into that street. The city doesn't have to rip up the street, and it'll cost $25,000. You will save $75,000 if you do this. In the process and title or what have you, the city saw what she was doing as like sneaky, or like, you're trying to save money, big. And she was like, I'm trying to save all of us money. She's like, I'm still tying into the city sewer system. I'm trying to keep from disrupting businesses on the street. And what's crazy is she made it work, but there were other developers in the past who probably had to abandon their project because they couldn't afford to tie into the sewer, or who probably couldn't provide the product the neighborhood wanted because now their price point was so high because of the overhead. And so this incremental development alliance, this idea of a network of developers within a city, could, one, see that and learn about that for their project that says, oh, wait, I have something on the other side of town. maybe I should give myself an easement and tie into a more feasible sewer line. Or they could be thinking, you know what? I'm going to show up at city council for you, or I'm going to show up to zoning commission for you, and you're going to do the same for me, or I'm going to email on your behalf. And I think this is what a lot of cities need, because right now, you know, you could see it as a robber or a vagrant working in the dark, or you could see it as like, and a lot of times, a legitimate Robin Hood who's tried to do something. Like, yes, they're skirting the edge of what's legal or what's allowed, but they're doing so in order to provide a great product for the city. And I don't want to glorify or say there are no bad developers, because literally that developer last week in city council that I was talking about earlier, I don't think had the community's interest in mind, and it came through. And I think that more developers need to work in this space together to help each other's projects pencil and work out.
It's literally why we started Local Real Estate Developers, the community, the podcast, to help people get into development on purpose, and to also then bring us together to go, hey, you're not doing it alone in Texas or Chattanooga or Tahoe or wherever. We can do this, because we do have a lot of fragmented components. And if we pull things together, like the Alliance, like Strong Towns, like, or Small Town, like Strong Nation, like all of the stuff, I think we can help pull together. And that's the ultimate goal of this, is how do we bring this all together to where we go, okay, cool. And we're sharing the little stories like, oh yeah, this thing called an easement could get you to that line. And there's nothing in the code that says no. And it's just a matter of educating and explaining. So love everything you're doing with all of that. You did mention earlier that you yourself might be in the future getting into some projects in your community. Do you want to share a little bit about what your goals in the next 5-10 years of what you think, hey, here's how I want to do it as well?
Yeah, so very early on, I sort of said, I'm not a developer. I represent a lot of developers, but that attitude in my mind is changing, because as I've come into contact with small scale incremental developers, I realize like, hey, sometimes it's weird that we only have one term that communicates a wide swath of people. If you're a homeowner that builds a backyard cottage that you then rent out, you're technically a landlord, but you have more in common with your tenant than you do with a big, Nashville-based property manager who manages 20,000 doors. And so in the same way, I've sort of eschewed this label of developer, but I'm coming to embrace it as like, I am a small scale developer. So I own a townhome outside of the home that I own here in Chattanooga in a different state. And I'm in the process of selling that to start what small scale developers sometimes refer to their farm or their ecosystem, to start investing in my community. And my ideal is to 1031 exchange it, start small and try to get something here where I can offer multiple units of housing. And I want to tell that story as I'm going through it, to show the roadblocks I'm running into and educate people like, hey, subsidized housing for cars or parking minimums are keeping me from building affordable housing in my community. So yeah, that I'm starting this journey as a developer where I want to build on a small scale. If I can't do that 1031 exchange, I'm then going to start pursuing an accessory dwelling unit in my backyard to also showcase how, adding density doesn't necessarily look different. Like I can recognize the historical sort of structures that we have around our neighborhood and make it fit right in with that.
Yeah, that's great. And also, too, to your point, it inspires others to consider taking on their first development project, no matter how big or how small. And since you've had such a lot of experience on the policy side and engaging with the community and also the people who are governing, hopefully you can inspire them to advocate on behalf of smaller developers as opposed to just focusing in on the people who are bringing in 300-unit apartment complexes and large retail or hospitality developments, because I feel like a lot of times the city, understandably, will focus their dollars towards projects that will be a big headline or supposedly have a huge impact on, the community. But in reality, it's a lot of times it's not necessarily going to be affecting a broad base of the community. It really focuses in on, areas of town that already have a lot of investment. And the goal with what we were trying to do with this podcast is to inspire people to just take on those small projects in their community. And over time, block by block, things begin to change.
Exactly. And I think one of the hardest things to do is realize like how pervasive these problems are and how they, let me give you another example specifically for my neighborhood right now. A small developer bought an old building that needed to be renovated and saved, old manufacturing building. And their architect came and showed them a parking lot that was going to cost them $250,000. It was going to create impermeable space on 30% of the property. And their idea was, if we're going to get people to come to this old building, we also need to make an outside that's cool and habitable. And it was almost like a public park, like green space you could enter with trees and whatever. And this was totally against it. So I remember the developer, this was his first big project. He came to me and said, what can we do instead of this? I was like, look, I'm not a professional, but I think some of our local laws that have changed, you could get this parking lot a lot smaller. And if you had it gravel, smaller and gravel, it would be cheaper for you. So you could invest more in the greenscaping. It would be a permeable space, or more permeable than asphalt. So we have less strain on our sewer system. And if you ever wanted to build in the future, you're a lot more likely, if it's allowed, to do it where you have gravel than where you put down asphalt. All these things made sense. And he said, okay, how do I do an asphalt parking lot? And I was like, I don't know. This brewery did it. Let's go talk to them. And when they went to the city was like, yeah, you can't do it. You have to do asphalt and you have to do it this big. He met with someone on the zoning commission who actually knew more than the architect said, here's how you could get it smaller. And then when he went to submit it, the day he went to submit it, the person there said, if these are your goals, we can get it this small, but why don't we also make it gravel? And he was like, are you kidding me? The city told me I couldn't do it gravel. The city told me I couldn't do it. He's like, oh no, if the skirt is concrete, if you have a concrete path getting to it, and if you have handicap paths or handicap spots that are concrete, the rest can be gravel. And it was sort of this institutional confusion and knowledge that's being lost because cities lose people in the building and permitting department who are interpreting things weird ways. All of those things are a bump for a large developer, who just says, okay, I'll just wait it out a month. I'll pay an extra lawyer fee. I'll figure this out. That's a bump on their development. But it is catastrophic to someone who is working with a thin margin, who is placing what to them is a big bet on this property. And what's sad is we were a week away from getting what was essentially just going to be a black tarmac across half of this property. Now it's trees, a kids play area, an outdoor screen that they do videos and movie nights on, and people that can literally walk their dog there without even stepping foot into the business. It's so much more delightful, and it was tenuous. It almost didn't happen. So you're right. It's like these small scale developers provide so much, but in little pinpricks throughout the community rather than one big sort of cornerstone park or something like that.
And these are the stories that we need to get out there. So just being able to share this, who knows what other light bulbs or things are going to go. So thank you so much for coming on today. If people want to connect with you, support you, follow along on your journey, what's the best ways for them to get in touch?
Yeah, you can look up the Happy Urbanist on whatever platform you prefer. So Instagram, TikTok, you'll find my handle there. I also write a Substack, a weekly newsletter, and that content seems to be a little bit different. So yeah, reach out, direct message me if you have any opportunities where you want me to come and speak to your community or look at developments and make videos about what you're working on. That's kind of what I do full time on the money side of things when I'm not doing advocacy stuff.
That's amazing. Well, Jon, we really appreciate your time, and we're really excited to hear the feedback from the audience regarding this episode. I think there's been a lot of insights shared, and yeah, I think we're going to have a good feedback. For those of you guys who are watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. It makes a huge impact on our ability to reach a broader audience, and we obviously greatly appreciate the support. Along with that, if you guys like this channel and you like this podcast, please leave a 5-star review on all platforms, including Apple Podcasts or Spotify. The more people that can engage with this podcast, then the more people can hopefully get inspired to take on their first real estate development project. So thanks again so much for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.